Hello, and welcome to the Jenkins Documentation Office Hours. Today is December 12th, 2024. This will be our last Docs Office Hours for the year, so thanks all for joining. And for those watching at home later, appreciate it. Around the table, we have myself, Kevin Martins, Chris Stern, Mark Waite, Bruno Verashton, and Meg McRoberts. So thank you all for joining and appreciate being here. Just to go over the agenda. So right now we've got the contributor spotlight, highlighting our last one for the year, some blog posts that have been published since our last session, results of the Jenkins elections, notes on the latest LTS and weekly updates, including a Jenkins security advisory that was published between our last session and this session. If Antoine joins, we can further discuss the plugin developer documentation. But if Antoine doesn't join, we'll table that for the time being, as the Blue Ocean deprecation conversation is something that I'd like to have here with everyone involved to get some perspective on that. Wanted to highlight some recent work done on Jenkins.io. And just a couple of notes here, where a note about stats.jenkins.io having a dark mode. And then Mark has added the Alpha Omega project ideas for a potential, another potential grant and collaboration with them. Any other topics that we'd like to cover today? Or does that cover, or does that take care of most things? Okay. So just to start off, so our last contributor spotlight of 2024 features James Nord. James has been a longtime contributor and part of the Jenkins project and community. And so we've got his story here about how he became involved with it and the things that he's been working on ever since. So thanks to James for the collaboration and participation in the project. And thanks to everyone for the past year. We've now had this going on for just over a year, and we've been able to highlight, I think Alyssa had gotten the data, 26 different contributors. So that's really fantastic. And it's really just exciting to see it come from the beginning before it was a thing to now where it's established. So really fantastic there. And then going into 2025, we discussed a couple of different topics in the advocacy and outreach meetings. We're going to look at Jenkins historical and alumni contributors, folks that have been a part of the project in the past, but may not be as active now. So people like Koshke, Tyler Croy, Andrew Bayer, others that have been involved in the project historically. I'm really just looking forward to sharing their historical insights on the project, and we'll see what happens with that, but really exciting things to come there. As far as the blog goes, we have had a couple blog posts that are not the Jenkins elections results, which we'll get to. But Bruno has provided us a second Alpha Omega progress report, which is really great. This highlights the work that was done in November. So all the work in plugins and making sure that they are up to date for CSP, the challenges that they've had with incorporating the CSP and implementing and improving it, and what they're looking ahead to do for the rest of December, and what they hope to achieve with the rest of the project. So thanks again to Shlomo Dahan and Yaroslava Fenkin for their work on this. Thanks to Basil for his guidance on the project, and Bruno for overseeing all of this as well. Their work has been amazing. It's gone on to show just how big of an impact the Alpha Omega grant has had, and just fantastic work all around. So thanks to them. And we've even had reports of plugin maintainers sharing that the work has helped them understand what work needs to be done in the future to help keep CSP up to date and implemented properly. And then the other blog post that we had was from Jan Faracek, highlighting that pull request titles are now visible within Jenkins UI. So this was work done as part of a recent release of the Branch API plugin and was requested as a feature from Jenkins Jira ticket, which is really exciting. Just to show that, just goes to show that we're listening to the community and we want to help keep things as well maintained and user friendly as possible. So just lots of work there done by the UI UX folks, thanks to them. And this is another example of migrating some of the Blue Ocean functionality to other places and other pieces of the Jenkins ecosystem. Next up, so there's the Jenkins election results. So voting concluded on November 31st. The voting results have been tallied, and we want to welcome Valentin DeLay and Alex Earl to the board as board members, and welcome back Alexander Brandis as a board member. So thanks to them for their commitment to joining the board and anything that comes their way over the next couple years. All the officers will remain in their positions to continue their roles. So thanks to all of the officers as well for agreeing to continue their work with the project and their commitments there. Thanks to everyone that participated in the elections, from submitting nominations to registering and voting, to just being part of the process in any way, shape, or form. This year, we actually did get to do proper elections with voting, so that was really exciting, and we had a good turnout for that. LTS 2.479.2 released successfully at the end of November. We had the changelog and upgrade guide available on the site, and this was handled by the Jenkins security team for the most part, because it was part of a security advisory. So that was the Jenkins core and plugins were part of that security advisory. We have that information here for anyone interested in finding out more about what that covers. But thanks as always to the Jenkins security team for taking the lead on that and making sure that everything was released properly. And then we've got 2.479.3 is scheduled to be released on January 8th next year. So just a week after the holidays have concluded and everyone's back to normal. And I've already opened up a pull request for the changelog and upgrade guide. So we've got that there. Any review is welcome. Yeah, Mark.
I was just going to ask for Chris's comments on 2.479.3. Chris, I saw that you delivered the release candidate. Did it look good? Are things generally okay on the 2.479.3 release candidate? We've got 2 extra weeks of time, so I'm not feeling pressed, but it's good to ask the release lead.
Yeah, it's looking all right, but we might want to backport like more commits later.
Of course, and that makes sense. We open the backporting pull request, and then we may get more backports as time goes forward. Great.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Chris and Mark. Appreciate that. Yeah, and I'll be sure to keep my eye out for that as we go along as well. The last couple of weeklies for 2.4888 and 2.489 have been released. Everything went pretty well for the most part. No major issues. There was something that had come up, but the info team was able to revert the issue that was preventing the Windows build from getting through. So thanks to them for that work and that vigilance on that. 2 points.
So before you get off that one,
yeah,
that work is coming back, and we like that it's coming back. Alex Earl was working on an upgrade problem that some Jenkins users have reported, where they said, "Hey, I'm running Windows. I install the latest. I upgrade. I use the Jenkins installer, the MSI. Then I follow the usual install path for Windows of clicking on the Upgrade Now button inside Jenkins, which replaces the local war file. Does not require privilege escalation, therefore is a nice experience for Windows users. That's a positive for Windows users, but then does not update the Windows registry with the version number of the installed, now current Jenkins version. And the reason it doesn't update the registry is because that's a privileged operation. So what Alex Earl is investigating right now is what can we do to help users who want their registry to match the installed controller. And it's a valid use case. I'm not a user of the Jenkins controller on Windows. I don't have the problem, but there are people who like using the Windows installer and like using Jenkins on Windows. So we want to be sure their needs are addressed. So Alex continues working on it. Tim Jacome has offered some suggestions as well.
Great. Thank you very much, Mark, for adding all that insight. That's great to know. And yeah, the work being done is really important and something that clearly would help a lot of users out. So fantastic. And on the weekly notes as well, so 2.490 will be next week. That'll be the last release of 2024 for the weekly line, as we are going to be taking the 2-week break at the end of the year. So everything will fall in line with that. I apologize for whatever loud noise just happened. My doorbell is terrifying. And once again, the Jenkins Security Advisory was released just at the end of November. That was the weekly release and LTS release for that date. So thanks again to the security team for the work on that. So Antoine hasn't joined us, but just to give a brief synopsis of the conversation that was started, Antoine was curious as to what we can do to enhance plugin development documentation. There are a lot of notes about work in progress and some stuff that has gaps. So when they encourage people to go over to that documentation, they want to have more confidence in that and make sure that sending them over there is not going to cause any confusion or create any issues where they might be having trouble with development. So more to come with that, more discussion to be had there. But it's a lot of, we need to have that knowledge incorporated in, but we need someone with that knowledge to help incorporate it.
Yeah, so that I agree wholeheartedly with Antoine's observation. I'm worried that the problem is not the observation. The problem is the effort required to make that transition. I guess we've got one story where it did work. We did the Improve a Plugin tutorial, right? But that didn't address the developer documentation. That addressed a very specific problem. The specific problem is developers needed, particularly new developers, needed some experience, some guidance on how to do rather common tasks. That's not the way the developer guide is structured right now. The developer guide is really focused on key concepts and how you comprehend those key concepts and apply those key concepts. Whereas Improve a Plugin tutorial was what I'd call almost trivial or very small tasks that can help people if we show them how to do them simply. All right. So it's a different, they're two very different audiences. No, maybe it's the same audience, but two very different efforts to create that documentation. So it's good insight. I'm just not sure how to address it without taking serious time from developers who can provide the documentation, other developers who then critique the documentation and correct its mistakes, and then finally we get it in.
Right. And I think you had a really good point there too, Mark, where the Improve a Plugin tutorial helps but it's dealing with already created plugins. You're improving something that already exists as opposed to fully developing a plugin from scratch. I could be completely wrong on this.
No, you are absolutely correct. But I would argue that 99% of the readers of plugin developer documentation will in fact be maintaining existing plugins, because we have 2,000 plugins and we get maybe 5 a month new. So at a ratio of 5 to 2,000, we've got a lot more work going on in existing plugins than we do in new plugins. And shortly after it's been a new plugin, it becomes an existing plugin. Therefore, my hunch is that the crucial thing for us is focus on existing maintainers and their common questions. The challenge then is, all right, are there common answers? And then the challenge is, how do we get that expressed with the precision that's expected of the developer guide? I mean, Improve a Plugin is kind of soft and fuzzy in some of the things because we were just trying to show how to do it, and the tasks were pretty simple.
I mean, definitely the right place to start with, though, and it is a complicated question that doesn't have an exact answer right now. But I was hoping that Antoine would at least in the coming sessions potentially join us and be able to help maybe provide some insight into some of those spaces that personally I just don't have, or that maybe his experience leads to a different question of how do we incorporate this, or what do we need to incorporate. So yeah, more to come with that, but it's a great discussion to have, and I think addresses something that needs addressing ultimately.
Yeah, and I agree. And having Antoine and others like Antoine help with the prioritization, which things should we address first, really, really valuable. Yes.
Yeah, that's a good point too, Mark. Thank you. Any other thoughts on the plugin development documentation before we move on to the next topic? Or okay. So the next topic that I wanted to touch on today is the Blue Ocean deprecation and Blue Ocean documentation updates that are going to be needed and that are needed at this point. So just to summarize what's happening at this point in time, Blue Ocean's no longer being actively maintained. It's been removed from the controllers for Jenkins. And so to try and keep up with all of the work being done, I've started working on adjusting the documentation to reflect that. So that includes removing the Blue Ocean plugin development documentation. That's done to avoid encouraging users to go through that process and develop plugins for something that's not being maintained. And I've also moved the Blue Ocean tutorials to the bottom of the page of the tutorials so that they are not front of mind here. And I've added the status note regarding what their current status is and what the fact that at some point in the near future, these tutorials won't be applicable anymore. And then I attempted to adjust some other some Docker documentation regarding the installation guide. But as Mark rightly pointed out, the information that I suggested isn't, well, the way I'm going about it is not correct in the sense that this information is still relevant to the installation documentation and important part of the process for what we're describing in the page. And now this also has to do with the idea of incorporating Docker Compose into the installation guide. Which is part of the work that, excuse me, that Bruno's been working on with the tutorials and revamping those to use Docker Compose instead. So I wanted to make sure that we took a moment and talked about all of this because there's something that I'm clearly missing in regards to what I need to do. But a bigger discussion about what needs to happen for the installation guide to use Docker Compose. And then after that, ideas and discussion about what to do with smaller references within the documentation to Blue Ocean, and for Blue Ocean documentation that may not have a one-to-one connection to something else, whether it's something that's being replaced with something like Pipeline GraphView, or if it's not something that's going to be replaced, what to do with that documentation. So, Mark, any other notes or anything you wanted to share?
So I'm going to, Bruno, you should probably just unmute your microphone because I'm going to ask you questions. And
Okay.
so, all right. So here's the complication that I see. So that, Kevin, could you open up that documentation page?
Which, the installation guide or the?
Yeah, the installation guide. So
Sure.
Yeah, here we go. All right. So installing under Docker. Today, this thing does an evil that Bruno, not we, Bruno has successfully removed from other places. The evil this thing does is it uses Docker in Docker, and that is fundamentally insecure. And we would really like to not be recommending fundamentally insecure things. It's even worse. It uses Docker in Docker, and it installs Blue Ocean. Bruno's also removed that from the tutorials. So we aren't using Blue Ocean in the tutorials, and we aren't using Docker in Docker. Both are exactly the right thing to do. But the problem, what Kevin's pull request proposed was to remove one of the references to Blue Ocean from this page without getting rid of all of the other Blue Ocean that's in it. And the problem with all the other Blue Ocean that's in it is I think it's premature, or maybe it's the wrong direction to approach it. Rather than deleting Blue Ocean references from this page as it exists and still doing Docker in Docker, should we consider going the other direction, and can we switch this? And now, Bruno, this is where I don't remember what the barriers were. I know we were blocked by some things. Can you help us remember what the barriers were that kept us from replacing this thing with Docker Compose?
Time, maybe.
Okay. So that means it's work, right? There is definitely work involved.
Yes, and we don't have. I don't know if you want to just get rid of Docker in Docker. I'm not so sure that in this tutorial we have a replacement for each and every feature we are using from the version. Just can't remember, but maybe that's a blocker. I don't know. I would have a look before answering for sure. But getting rid of Docker in Docker should not be a problem for this part of the documentation. And now for getting rid of Blue Ocean at the same time as Docker and Docker, I can't remember for the timing. Sorry.
Well, so Kevin, scroll down because this is the install guide. It's fundamentally not a tutorial. So for me,
why do you need Blue Ocean?
Right, we shouldn't need Blue Ocean. Keep scrolling, Kevin, because we want to see if there's some hint that says you must have Blue Ocean in some step, and it's unlock, which is not a Blue Ocean step, create the first admin user, and customizing with plugins. So now maybe there may well be other places where the same content's used that can't be done this way, but for me at least, the install instructions seemed like a candidate maybe for in the new year in January or February we look at shall we target this page again. I don't want Kevin to do a half a step forward that we're then going to throw away when we replace this with Docker Compose. Now,
I think there was a discussion in the discussion itself, because I think I can remember that Damien wanted to get rid of that installation page and do something that looks more like what we do in Linux and so on. So we could replace everything with Docker, with a quick start tutorials and so on, but that would be an intermediary step, I would say, before getting rid of all that and do as we do in other parts of the documentation.
Thank you for saying the magic word. I remember now. It was that Damien had a bigger picture vision for this, and really it might be two. I think his suggestion was two visions, two-pronged approach. One of them was for the sort of a simple case, and the other one was production use. And production use probably isn't done the way we do tutorials. Right? We create a tutorial intentionally so that it can be disposable. So it will be discarded. We know it will. But production use does not do things with the intent of discarding them. And so it's a very different thing. And thank you for the reminder. It is that Damien correctly says as infra officer, look, the Linux instructions are about production use. And the Windows instructions are about production use. This is how you run this thing in production, and you get really good results out of it. The Kubernetes instructions are an attempt, at least, at production use. And again, those are particularly Linux and Windows are very much production focused, whereas the Docker instructions today give you something that lets you build Docker containers from inside your Jenkins controller, but they do it insecurely, right? And it's still not production use. The Docker page we have today is not production use, because the people who are doing production use will commonly do it in Kubernetes if they're doing a container, right? And if they're not doing containers in Kubernetes, they'll probably do much more than our installation instructions tell them. Thank you.
Who uses Docker in production? Thank you. Yeah, welcome.
Actually, I admit it. I use Docker in production for my testing, but I also have an enormous amount of infrastructure that I use to care for it, and I would never dare to claim that my way of doing it is the right way. That's where Damien and the infra team could say, no, Mark, you're doing foolish things by doing this and this. And my answer is, it's production for one user, so I don't mind that my production is imperfect. Good. Thank you, Bruno. So Kevin, if we can note in the notes that the bigger picture is that the Docker install guide is much closer to a tutorial than it should be, right? While the Linux and the Windows install guide is absolutely focused on production use. And those are two very different use cases. And so we really need a Docker installation guide that gives you production use. and we just don't have it right now. And the work to create it is non-trivial. Because we have tutorials now and they work great, right? They're easy to start, easy to stop, easy to clean. What we don't have is production grade Docker installation. And we might also say, hey, we really need to revisit our Kubernetes install guide because it's been a long time since it had updates, and there are many better ways to do things than what we've documented.
Great. No, that's fantastic. Thank you very much,
So-
Bruno and Mark, for
Thanks for opening the topic, because what that means is Mark Waite just acknowledged that this is much bigger than Blue Ocean deprecation, right? It's really, we discovered it through Blue Ocean deprecation, but really this is a much bigger thing, and we'll need to plan for it in a much bigger way. Thanks.
No,
Yeah, Bruno, thank you for your insights.
yeah, that's and that's a lot of, I think I was missing some of that context or some of that background, so that helps a lot. And I also realized after the fact that I had missed a lot of other Blue Ocean references, so if I was going to try and remove it, should have looked a little bit more broadly, but that's okay.
Right, and it doesn't stop us from, I mean, we could still, as a short-term thing, remove Blue Ocean from those instructions and replace it with Pipeline Graph View. That would still leave us with Docker and Docker, but it would get rid of Blue Ocean. The challenge then is we've got to be sure that those instructions still work. That's less work. And it's still a laudable goal. That's a worthwhile goal, to switch Blue Ocean to Pipeline Graph View, but the install instructions will have to change to do that.
Yeah, right. We could pair, Kevin, if you ever had the time on this subject.
Yeah, I'd be more than happy to, Bruno. So
Cool.
yeah, we'll carve out some time to take a look at that together and go through that for sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, so that's a lot more. That's a little bit more than I had bargained for initially, but we'll get there. That's fine. That's what this is all about. And then a couple other things I wanted to bring up as far as the discussion goes. I know we're right up against time. If everyone's okay, taking an extra couple minutes to just look through some of this stuff. So in this attempt at removing Blue Ocean from the Docker installation, because I took such small snippets of it, I was playing around with what to do with items like that within the documentation, whether they need to be retained for historical purposes or if it's okay to just update those bits of information accordingly. And if it comes down to they're no longer relevant, if they're no longer useful and they don't fit, is it okay to remove them? Is it something that they should be retained on a separate page? And going further than that into the documentation that might not have a replacement. I included the dashboard and activity view pages specifically, since they are specific Blue Ocean functions and views, that while the pipeline graph view might replace some of these pipeline run details view, for instance, and some of the other pieces, it's not going to be a one-for-one on that front. And what would be the best way to go about signaling that to readers?
Show me dashboard again, because I think we might actually have a viable replacement for dashboard as part of, yeah. So could you open up ci.jenkins.io just so that we can take a look at it? Okay, so now open, say, packaging.
Okay.
And yeah, Docker is a good choice. Docker, very top. Click master. Notice, okay, oh no, this is not yet showing the graph view. Okay, go click inside, click one of the builds. So on the left. Yeah. Okay, this view can be presented one layer up by pipeline graph view. So if you click on master, it can be presented at this level instead of stage view. The question then is that enough in that documentation page?
Right.
So dashboard view, activity view, no. Activity view just doesn't exist. And,
right.
And I think that's okay that we just acknowledge it doesn't. Yeah, I didn't personally find it terribly useful, so I'm not deeply attached to this page.
And then in that case too, Mark, I guess with like something like this with dashboard view, it's so when I looked at the pipeline run details view, that seemed more in line with the graph view.
Right.
So in that sort of, we could create a separate page for pipeline visualization, and I think we've discussed that before, as having a page talking about pipeline visualization, using that instead of something like this. But then I think that kind of goes to my original question of what do we do with this then at that point? Is this a redirect, or is it something that we remove and just have the pipeline documentation state as much? I've been looking at other documentation, and they have added something like deprecated at the top next to the title of the page to help indicate that. But I'm not sure if that's the best way to go about it, or if there might be something better visually, I'm thinking in this case.
Okay, so bring up the Blue Ocean page, and I'm going to ask a question to Meg and to Bruno. So the crucial thing here is, all right, so first thing on the Blue Ocean page, what we see is a bunch of subheadings, right? So getting started, creating a pipeline, dashboard. And I think there is enough content there that we probably can't get rid of it. What if it moved to the bottom, so below troubleshooting Jenkins, or disappeared completely from this level and only stayed as pages, but not in the table of contents on the left? So expand pipeline now, Kevin, over on the left, so that we can see. So pipeline, we would add a visualizing pipelines here and remove the Blue Ocean bullet on the left. So Meg, I think I'm going to go to you first, and then Bruno to you on which one do you think would it be okay if Blue Ocean disappeared, but was still reachable from your web browser? So take it out of the table of contents, but don't delete the pages. Or is that bad form, Meg?
How accessible is it? It means if I've previously had this information, I can get to it.
If you have a bookmark to it, you could still find it because the page URL would not change.
But if I'm a new hire at a site that's still using Blue Ocean,
then you've lost it. So maybe I think what you're saying is, are you saying then if we put in the title deprecated and put it down further, but leave it in the table of contents?
right? That's one. A third option, I don't know if I like this, but could have just the header that if you're using Blue Ocean and that links to the deprecated page does not show up as part of the official documentation. But from there, we can say, Blue Ocean's deprecated, you should be using this. But if you need the doc, click here and it's retained.
Got it. Okay, good. Thank you. So leaving it in the table of contents, mark it as deprecated. Wait, no. So I'm sorry. Tell me again. You're the one that was less attractive to you.
You remove the information from the docs, but you leave somewhere a header or a pointer or something that lets them click to this deprecated doc that's not showing up. That was not articulated.
Okay, so
I'm more articulate later in the day. The information is not, the main information is not in the docs, but there is one link that lets you get there.
So that would break links for those who have the links in their bookmarks, but no.
So leave it in the same place, I think. I don't know, and it may not be a good idea.
Oh, okay. So I think what you're describing is effectively what I described. So that's good,
Yeah.
Which is leave it where it is, but take it out of the table of contents on the left.
Right.
So,
But
and then
add the link somewhere. I think that's what Meg was saying. The link somewhere.
right.
a link within the doc. So if I'm
Right.
at
Okay.
a company that's not using it, I've got a link to it.
All right. So maybe that's an entry where we say at the top of the visualizing pipelines page and a few other pages like it, we might say, if you're still using the deprecated Blue Ocean, click here to get it. And then it opens that page, even though it's not in the index in the table of contents on the left.
Yes.
Okay. I like that. All right. That's good. So that would give us a way to take it out of the visibility of typical users and still retain their URL and give us pointers to that old material if they need it. I like that. Okay,
Yes.
good. Thanks. Okay, Bruno, your comments next. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm on the same line. So get rid of it in the menu, but let it accessible in a way or another. The other thing that bothers me is that there are some functionality, some features that aren't replaced by the pipeline graph view. So if some people are looking for some good-looking UI with their pipelines, we have nothing to propose for some parts of what Blue Ocean used to do. So yes, we can make it disappear, but maybe we'll lose a few developers wanting to have something good looking in their Jenkins controller. But that's okay, I guess, because it's deprecated, so we should get rid of it, and we shouldn't hope to have the exact same set of features in Pipeline Graph View soon. So that's okay, I guess.
Yeah,
And how large a group of users are we talking about here?
well, so Blue Ocean, I think, has several. Well, hang on. Let me give a real data-driven answer. Just a minute. So installation count, we've got 70,000 installations of Blue Ocean worldwide, out of a pool of 300,000 controllers installed worldwide. And so lots of them installed. Now, in terms of version distribution, the version distribution, most recent LTS has 23% of one quarter of the Blue Ocean installs are on most recent LTS or newer. So it's not badly out of date. If we go back one major LTS, 40% of all installs are at least on 2.452.4. So current LTS -2. So that's a good story. They're upgrading. Now, it may also be that they're upgrading and not using it. That data we can't tell.
Yeah. A possibility, it's a little more work, but maybe not a lot because it could be soft information, is to this body of Blue Ocean documentation that we're going to sort of hide.
Right.
We could add a section at the end that has a note about compatibility features or something like this. And it may be something that, like, Mark you could almost do off the top of your head, because it doesn't have to be hardcore. But to say that, if you wanted this in Blue Ocean, this is what you get with Pipeline View. And to say
okay,
these features of Blue Ocean do not have a direct answer in Pipeline View. But here's some thoughts, and one of it could be, most of us never found this terribly useful. Or this information is sort of available from this and this in Pipeline View. It's just a different packaging or something. But to do it right and strict would be a lot of work, but I'm kind of hearing a little Mark voice, a couple of paragraphs in the list or something where it's just, avuncular, shall we say, rather than highly technical.
Thanks. Good suggestion. We might, as part of the walkthrough, Kevin, I think what I'm taking from Meg's suggestion is, as part of your walkthrough, considering, does this have a replacement? If so, point to it. If not, acknowledge there is no replacement for this, right? And then
maybe give a hint about
it.
Yeah, and you maybe give a hint. I mean, there's nothing wrong with, we're deprecating this software. That there were things that seemed like a really good idea early on that really aren't that useful or whatever.
Right.
Some sort of anecdotal reference as to why that's not useful, or why it hasn't been actively maintained, or like why that piece isn't found useful in another plugin, stuff like that.
Just like we've got the story right now about, hey, this is the thing. Yeah.
Because I can see if I'm a new user, even if it's an old company it's installed, but I look and I'm like, well, why isn't this here? Because I'm used, there's 20 features and, where are they all? And just say that experienced users found this less than useful, or, Or just that, if this sort of information is available, if you combine this and this in pipeline view. I don't know.
Great. Thanks. Okay, so I think we've vetted the topic well enough, Kevin, for more detailed planning. At least for me, I feel like we've got some ideas there. Now we need to explore them, and we're probably still 12 months away from needing from it actually being deprecated. So I'm not overly worried about that this has to happen immediately, rather that I like that we're having the discussions to begin.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, and Meg, thank you so much for joining the session today and participating in the discussion, helping us with this. I know that
It's
you're
actually fun to talk to you guys rather than just read about what you talked about several hours later. We should have done it a while ago.
Now, wait a sec, everyone. What Meg is really saying is it's kind of boring to talk just to Mark. That's what she's really saying. And that's the valid point. It is. It's
The
much
sad
better.
part of this is that I do miss the conversations with just Marks. And sometimes with Chris, which those were fun too. And I was awake, so there was that priority, but
Onward. Enough heckling of Meg. That's great. Yes, I agree with Kevin. Thanks for joining us, Meg.
and
good.
any insights, discussion, anything, anytime you want to join, I'm more than welcome, Meg. I really appreciate it.
Oh, it's hard. I'm very shy with my opinions, but I'll give it my best effort.
Based on Mark's reaction, I don't know how true that is, but I'll take your word for it for right now.
Yeah, it's a bold-faced lie, so but thank you.
Precisely. What Meg said doubled. Yes, absolutely. Meg has never been shy, and I love it. That's great. Thanks, Meg, very much.
Great. Thank you so much. So we'll continue planning on that, and we'll continue the conversation as time goes on. Couple of updates on recent Jenkins.io work. So thanks to Chris for continuing to work on the Google Summer of Code 2025 docs and pages. They've been updating all of that information accordingly. And preparation is well underway for 2025. So we're obviously waiting to find out if we've been selected as part of it, but we're planning for it. We've got project ideas. I've signed on to be a co-mentor for the site retooling build to help with the documentation aspect. And yeah, we're moving. And then thanks to Birgit Saikiev recently for documentation update, and also working on looking to archive the older LTS change logs. Really fantastic to have a new contributor participating like this. Thanks so much for the work and for the collaboration, the being receptive to feedback and suggestions. Just fantastic all around. And yeah, work that needs to be done, and that is only going to enhance the Jenkins.io documentation and site overall.
So Kevin, Bruno, I
Yeah.
was worried specifically when I stepped in there, was I a disruptive influence by saying, hey, let's do it the way we've already got it? It looks like that was far easier for the contributor. Are you okay with that? Or do you want to tell me, Mark, please stop getting involved like that?
Mark, please continue to be involved.
Okay. No offense taken. No, Mark, you're getting into places. Okay, good.
Not whatsoever. Frankly, you brought up points that I hadn't considered in terms of like, we already have this in place. Why not just convert it? So amazingly helpful. Thank you so much for that insight, Mark.
Okay, good. Yes. Go ahead, Meg.
No, please finish.
I was finished.
Okay. Tangential issue. Just wondering if the work that we were discussing about Kubernetes installation, if that might be, I mean, we don't have a lot of GSOC projects that are real writing. If you had a real writer come into GSOC.
Yeah, GSOC doesn't allow writing projects. So
that would have to be Summer of Docs. Okay,
right,
yeah.
and Summer of Docs has a very different set of requirements, and it's a valid thing to consider. But when I looked at Google Summer of Docs, their timeline is like, I think it would be a perfect candidate for us, given if you were still available. But I think it doesn't actually start the work until like summer. So if we were to launch a Google Summer of Docs, we'd have to submit the project proposal in early calendar 2025, and it takes months to go through it. So I'm less interested in Google Summer of Docs than I am in Alpha Omega as a possible funding source for some documentation ideas.
Okay, I was just thinking that was something that, because so much of the docs, you need sort of a profound, broad understanding.
Right.
And that installation, and at least on another project I'm involved with, a lot of our GSOC applicants have learned a lot of Kubernetes in school, so they have. And so installation, you wouldn't need to have the full broad understanding that you have for most of the writing that we'd need. So
Yeah, and my problem there is a very specific one. We wrote the existing Kubernetes documentation in a Google Summer of Docs project, and the problem was we didn't have enough Kubernetes expertise. We had Kubernetes amateurs who were doing it, and that's
great.
that was maybe okay the 3 or 4 years ago when we did it, but today it's not okay, and we need the Kubernetes experts, the Damien Deportal, the Stefan Merle, the Hervé Lemur, people like that who can say, no, you shouldn't, or should never ever do that kind of thing you just suggested doing. So
Yeah. Okay,
it's
bad idea.
yeah, different thing though.
Yeah.
Okay, and then yeah, just and Tim Jacome updated the image compression check for pull requests coming into the Jenkins.io repository. He had implemented this a little while ago. There were some errors popping up based on user submissions, but that's been fixed and updated since. So thanks to Tim for the work on that. And then stats.jenkins.io has dark mode available as well, so in line with the site. And then Mark added a couple notes here. Mark, do you want to take this?
Yeah. Okay. So this is, sorry, I'll need like 10 minutes. Meg, are you okay spending? Chris, you need to drop off. I know this is the middle of your night, and I'm really sorry.
No, I have something. I have to take the dog to the groomer in a couple hours. So
Okay. So
I'm up.
great. Concept is this, and Bruno, you're crucial for this one because it's a multi-person, multi-pronged effort. So the idea is the following. Alpha Omega is looking at ways to improve the security of open source software and improve the security of people who use open source software. One of the ideas that I had was a possible project which says, hey, let's construct tutorials that show people how to use Jenkins to build a software bill of materials for a Java application, for a JavaScript application, for a Python application, or a Golang application. So using open source tools to generate a software bill of materials, an SBOM. Now, does that actually help Jenkins project's own security? No, but it might help the users of Jenkins to better know how to do things. The problem with the idea is it's not something we could just have a writer like Meg or like Kevin do, because somebody's got to do the technical side of the here's how it's done. And Bruno, that's why I thought of you or of Darren or of me, somebody who would say, hey, let's explore this thing. The question then becomes, Meg, would you be interested in that if we did it on the writing side? And Bruno, this would be sometime in January, February, March kind of time of 2025. Is it even feasible, or am I talking about the wrong thing? Because part of me says I haven't actually seen massive benefit from SBOM. Right? There's a reason why we don't have blog posts on Jenkins.io for SBOM. Thanks, Sohan. Thanks very much. So Meg, interested? Bruno,
I'd be good.
If not, it's perfectly okay to say not really.
I'm terrified by JavaScript, but apart from that, I'm okay with the project.
Well, since it's purely build tooling related, not
Then that's okay.
It's basically you take a JavaScript project, and of course, saying JavaScript is probably the wrong way to say it, because it's likely there are many different builders in JavaScript, right? And you're using one of those to perform the thing. So yes, part of the problem here is in fact the varied language ecosystems where Jenkins is used and how wildly different they are. Python SBOM is certainly a very different thing than Java SBOM, right? How you generate it, how you maintain it, etc.
But yeah, definitely.
Okay.
Yeah. So especially with security, we can't think of it as a side. I mean, basically we're talking about using Jenkins to enhance the security of your whole site.
Well, of the thing you're building, right? Say, hey, Jenkins user, here's a way to help the people downstream of you who may need to check for vulnerabilities. You generate an SBOM at build time that says what the contents of your thing is. And that may help or it may not, but you've generated it.
Right.
So that one for me was okay, it's not huge. I think I can conceive how to do it. The next idea was SigStore is a code signing utility. It's something akin to the code signing that we do today for the Jenkins MSI installer, where we acquire in our case, we acquire a rather expensive key that is authenticated by an upstream organization that says this thing is built by the Jenkins project, absolutely. And SigStore does that without requiring that expensive upstream provider. It has a way of saying, I confirm that the thing that built this is who it says it is. So that for me is more complicated because it's got more things that could go wrong. And then the third item is even more complicated, where there's this group called SLSA, SLSA, that attempts to construct build processes that are repeatable and secure. And if you think about what that means, it's, wait a sec, secure, because that's secure even at the operating system level, so that you're confident that the place where you built it had exactly the set of things on it that you wanted it to have on it, and that it requested the things from exactly the place it should have requested, and it got them, and all sorts of things like that, right? Where you can imagine, hey, can I trust Maven Central? Why? Can I trust the Jenkins Update Center? Why? Can I trust, etc.? And that's the sort of thing that SLSA's thinking about. So for me, that one is much, much more difficult and would not be likely to ever be started until we had successfully done at least the first idea and probably the second.
Yeah.
Okay, so comments, okay? I mean, if I start talking to Alpha Omega about these ideas, I didn't hear either of you, Bruno or Meg, saying absolutely not. I'll talk to Darren to see if he would be interested as well.
No, I think it sounds like a good idea. I hate security. I hate that we live in a world where everything is under such threat, but we do. And it means anything we can do to enhance our users' ability to keep themselves secure is worth an effort, I think.
Great. All right, that's all that I had. Thanks, Kevin, for letting me steal time.
Yeah, of course, Mark. Thank you. And thanks to everyone for sticking around for this long. I know we're a little bit past time here. But yeah, no, it's been a great having the conversations and the discussions. Hopefully we can keep this going in the next year. So thank you very much.
Fabulous.
Yeah. We'll go ahead and wrap up the meeting for now. Recording will be available 24 to 48 hours and cross-posted at community.jenkins.io. Until then, thanks again, everyone, for another wonderful year. And we look forward to seeing everyone again in 2025. Have a good one.
Thank you.
Bye.